Welcome to another episode of Poetic Lines. Many people work for years or decades to publish a collection of their poems, yet once their book is in print, the work of promoting it begins. My guest today is not a poet, but he understands the challenge of connecting with an audience and standing out from the crowd. Darrell Laurant is an author, editor, and blogger who spent more than 35 years as a reporter and columnist with several daily newspapers in South Carolina and Virginia. He was the co-founder of South Carolina Sport Magazine in the late 1970s and has published 5 books, most recently Inspiration Street. In 2016, Darrell, who now lives in upstate New York, started Snowflakes in a Blizzard, a unique, author-friendly, and absolutely free book marketing blog and email service that has highlighted more than 1,200 books of various genres. Darrell says that since the blog began, he has become a convert to the joys of poetry. He is here today to talk about some of those joys and about the importance of persevering with one's writing. Darrell, welcome to the show. Your blog is so engaging and distinctive. How did you decide to start the blog, and where did the name come from?
Well, I started it in 2016. I had just retired from a long newspaper career and moved to upstate New York, where it snows a lot. And I'd just gotten my first novel published. I was having a hard time marketing it. I was getting a little discouraged about that. And I hate winter anyway. I was looking out my window one day at a typical Adirondack blizzard, and it played a little game where you try to pick up one snowflake and follow it all the way to the ground, which is almost impossible. And the thought occurred to me that being noticed is kind of like a snowflake trying to stand out in a blizzard. So that idea struck me, and that day I started a blog with that name, Snowflakes in a Blizzard. The only thing a person has to do if they want to participate is fill out a form that I send, and then I take that form, put it together with a picture of the author and a picture of the book cover, and that goes out to all of the blog followers, which are about 3,000 or so by now. It kind of gives, it's like it gives the author the opportunity for a one-on-one conversation with that person. It's all in their own words. I don't really have anything to do with that. I don't I don't critique any books. I don't review them, although people are welcome to include reviews on their form. There's a place for that. Uh, but it's all in their words, and I don't charge for this for a couple of reasons. One, I really wanted it to be a service, to writers, because I've been writing most of my life, and I kind of feel a kinship with people who do, and I thought maybe that would be helpful. And the other reason is I can't really promise anyone that it will result in book sales, and because I can't do that, I wouldn't feel right taking money for it because it just sort of goes out there, and I kind of compare it to it's almost like a dating service. I can set you up with a date, but I can't guarantee how that will turn out. I can just put you in the same room with another person. That's how it started. And I, yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Another thing with me, I missed. I've been in the newspaper business as a reporter, columnist for 35 years, and I missed the newsroom. I missed working with people, and all of a sudden we came up here to take care of my mom, who was in her 90s. I felt kind of isolated. So this was a way of getting to hook up with other writers, and I've enjoyed it. And I've made some really good contacts that way.
I'm sure that people who have been featured on the blog have also made some great contacts, maybe not immediately, but as you said, the introduction is so important, and you never know where an introduction may lead a few months or years down the road.
No, that's true. And one of the fun things is starting now, we've done, I always say we because I consider I do it myself, but all the people who participate, I consider them part of the group. So I always say we. But we've done over 1,200 books so far, and it's been every little bit of everything, novels, nonfiction, memoir, short stories. I love short stories, poetry, you know, all that sort of thing. And what's happening now is that you can look on the site and see all the people who've contributed, and people are saying, "Oh, I know her, I know him." The more people I add, the more commonality there is.
You are definitely building community, which is so important for writers.
Oh, it is. It's hard to function in a vacuum, which is what you often find yourself doing. It's really hard. And plus, I mean, I always like to have other people read the stuff I'm doing because it's so easy for you to kind of have tunnel vision when you look at what you're writing and you don't see something that to somebody else might be really obvious. So you need to get out of yourself, I think. Emily Dickinson notwithstanding.
When we spoke earlier, you said that you haven't always been a fan of poetry. Why was that the case?
Well, it just wasn't on my radar. And I was probably like a lot of other people. I thought poetry was something that went on greeting cards. And it was nice and it was cool if you could do it, but it wasn't anything that I didn't particularly care to read about. So and I guess like a lot of people in my generation too, I got my poetry through song lyrics, which in many cases are, very poetic. But then when I started the blog, okay, since it's free, I had the I was thinking about how do I attract people to it, both followers and authors. As far as authors were concerned, I didn't want to advertise it in any sort of public way. For one thing, it's expensive. I didn't want to spend the money since I wasn't getting any money in. And for another, I didn't want to be overwhelmed with people wanting to do it because it's free. So what I started doing is I love these little indie publishers. There are a million of them. And I would go to their website and they'll list all their books and talk about them and all this. So I would find books that interested me, I thought would interest our followers. Then I write them a letter, the author, Point being, when I started going to these publisher sites, I started realizing all the different things that poetry was doing now, was the way people were using it. And I was seeing like entire books based on one poem. And I was seeing that people would juxtapose poetry and prose back and forth as they went through the book. And that was very effective. I just started rethinking poetry. I got more and more interested in it and started buying some of these books and so that's basically what changed my mind about it.
I'm fascinated by the way your perception has changed, and what you said makes perfect sense. What are some of the kinds of poetry that you have seen since you have started the blog?
The subjects have broadened considerably. I just came across a book the other day. It's titled Bone Heaps in the Lion's Den, is what it's called. And it was written by a woman who spent her whole career working in a hospital, in critical care unit of a hospital. So the poems were about the patients that she dealt with. And a poem that I'll read a little bit later, it talks about people's memories of their childhood, but it's done in such a way that I think most people can relate to. And then there was a really interesting collection of poems by a woman named uh, Roxana Kazan, and it's about a family that emigrated to the United States and got settled and got jobs. Everything was fine. Then they found out that their parents back in Romania were very ill, and there was the medical care where they were was not good. There was really nobody to take care of them, so they had to start taking turns going back to Romania and spending a month, 2 months, 6 months at a time with their parents. And it was just, it's not something you think you could capture in poetry, but she did it really well. Poetry, too, I think is really good for conveying personal emotion, you know. So those are a couple of the things that I've noticed. And some of them are just flat funny, you know. There's a lot of humor in poetry, too.
So it sounds as though poetry does reflect and can contain almost any aspect of experience. And that's something that not everyone knows. Although there is also the music of poetry, the concision of poetry. There are so many powerful aspects of the genre. Sometimes it's just a matter of helping people understand that or connect with it for the first time.
Yeah, and I'll make another comparison a little later about country music and poetry, but it also kind of reminds me of jazz a little bit. Whereas a song can be, sort of all over the place if it's jazz, but what you're listening to is what they're doing with their instruments, and the sound of it, and you're not so much worried about the lyrics if there are any lyrics. And I think that poetry can do that too. I couldn't write a line in a novel or a nonfiction book composed of just random words that didn't seem to make any sense when you put them together. If I did this for a whole book, nobody would read it. But poetry, it's almost like a musical thing. You can just they're describing things just for the sheer joy of describing them, and not just because it's going anywhere.
You told me previously that you think poetry is on the verge of a golden age. Why do you feel that way?
Well, I think public public interest and public attention is growing. When the young woman Amanda Gorman, who read a poem at the last presidential inauguration, that went viral, as they say, everywhere.
Yes, that poem went viral because it was so powerful and powerfully presented. It captured the challenges and the hope of a nation.
And then, too, as I mentioned country music. That used to be a little enclave all of itself in music. I mean, there are a lot of fans. They're mostly in the South and in the Midwest. And generally, if you were a country music fan, that was it. That's what you liked. And if you liked other things, you generally didn't like country music. But in the 70s, there started to be like a coalition between rock and roll and country. You had a band that comes to mind, the Eagles.
Mhm.
The Eagles would have been a country band at one point, but they came along as a rock band, and they were one of the groups that sort of helped to bridge that gap. Waylon Jennings has a line in the song as a country singer, said, "It's the same old tune, fiddle and guitar. Where can we take it from here?" And that was the way country music was. Now all of a sudden, it could expand. So, a good example of the versatility of people now. Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift started out as a country singer, and then she became sort of a rock and roll singer, and now she's kind of a pop singer. But so people are doing both now. Also, the internet. You can set up a YouTube page and read your poetry for nothing, and how that does depends on how good a job you do getting the word out. And poems are very concise. You can send them around the internet. You can post a poem on your Facebook page, whereas you probably couldn't do that with a novel or a book of short stories. People wouldn't have time to read it. So people might see that and say, "Well, that's pretty good." And I think the whole scene is kind of aimed in that direction. I love the magazine Poets and Writers, and I subscribe to it. I really enjoy it, but I don't like the title because I think what the message is if you're a poet, you're not a writer, and if you're a writer, you're not a poet, and that sets up a wall that I don't think should be there. I don't think they intended that way, but that's what it kind of comes across. But now you see more and more. I mean, I've had people in Snowflakes. I've done a novel they did, and then I've done a book of poetry. and then I've done short stories. People are a good writer is a good writer, you know. I mean, poetry is a little different in some ways, but you know, that's another reason I think that popularity is spreading.
So it sounds like the common thread in all of those examples you've just shared is that people are thinking beyond traditional boundaries. They're thinking outside the box in how they use language. And they're not just looking at a genre, but looking at language as almost a tool belt and using the different tools that they have in new ways, combining tools, combining imagery, combining different approaches, and coming up with new ways of expressing what people think, what people feel, and what is going on in the culture right now.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Could I read a little bit of that one poem?
I was just about to ask you to do so.
This is by a man named Sidney Lee, and he was once the poet laureate of Vermont for 6 years, I think. Very neat guy. He's 82 years old, I think, and still cranking out poetry books. He's got another one coming out. But anyway, this poem by Sidney talks about childhood, and he's looking back and trying to figure out if he had a happy childhood or not. But anyway, I'll read a little bit of it. Astonishing, this never ending effort to have had a happy childhood. Why does it matter now? Why will yourself with all that forgetting? She may have been a good mother, at least she tried. You contend you do remember moments that glow. You picture her standing one day in the snow, her teeth in a chatter, no doubt, and yet she looked quite cheerful, or so she seemed to be trying, as you are. The teeth, at least, were one good feature, radiant to the end. But there's little subtleties in that. You can tell he wasn't really happy with his mother, little things he says in there. But that's a kind of a universal emotion, looking back on your child. That was Sidney Lee.
What's powerful about those stanzas is that there is a universality to them. And as you listen, you can immediately relate to what he is expressing and what he experienced. But there's also a level of specificity that makes that experience his alone. And that's one of the things that poetry does so well is it balances the universal and the particular. And it allows people to understand how someone else felt. It becomes a way of creating community in a very subtle and very powerful way.
You know, that's very true. And it's a little bit like, you know, conversations that you have in some sort of gathering, like a dinner party or something. Somebody will say, well, this happened to me, right? And then somebody else will say, oh, yeah, what? I'll tell you what happened to me. And then somebody else will say, yeah, something similar. And then everybody will weigh in with their own specific takes on that sort of a universal topic. Your car broke down. Well, let me tell you about my car, you know. So, and that's yeah, again, what poetry does. I'd like to read. Um, this is something called Dakar. It's written by Gabriel Seville, and I think it's probably classified as prose poetry, but it's part of a longer performance that she does. This is very much a woman's poem, written by a woman. It's written about a group of African women who were dancing at some kind of festival in front of a mirror, and the audience is intended to be other women, I think, based on some of the things. I'll read it anyway. I think it's a great example of description. If she were writing a newspaper story or magazine article on this, go to these people and ask them all kinds of questions. Why are you dancing in front of a mirror? How long have you been dancing? Do you do this often? And on and on and on. Because people would expect that. But in a poem, kind of laser in on the description. And you kind of see it unfolding as she sees it. Be there, dancing with their backs to the crowd, their faces absorbed in reflections. Women of Dakar, dancing in mirrors, wearing tight embroidered jeans or short miniskirts with tall boots, wearing thick lipstick, powder, and blush, wearing wigs or weaves, wearing elaborate braids. Women of Dakar, so stunning in their beauty, their style, their dark brown skin, their touch of haughtiness, their gestures so precise they are almost ceremonial. A certain thrust, a powerful turn of the hip, done as if effort was no expense. And yet that's not true. Try to do it. Try to stand there and roll your hips slowly, surely, with control, with beauty, looking only into your own eyes. And then, when the song is right and it's 3 a.m. and everyone is finally there, gleaming, preening, steady, cool, do it more. And again, that's very specific, but also universal.
Oh, I agree. It also combines the power and concision of poetry with the narrative flow of nonfiction or fiction. So it is a nice way of combining various elements. And as we were talking about earlier, using different tools from your language tool belt.
Yeah, and I think this, again, I would call this prose poetry. And some of what she does in this book is just for prose, and some of it is more poetry. But there were some beautiful phrases there.
I love the sections you read, Darrell. That's such a variety of styles. What kind of feedback have you gotten about the blog?
People are appreciative of it. They're surprised when they see the posts that I send out. Sometimes they say they might have noticed an uptick in sales. I guess one of the things that says a lot is I've had people who have given me like 4 or 5 books over the years. So people have come back, a number of times. What I do is I look at the Amazon sales numbers, and I have a certain cutoff point, someone like that. I mean, so it's got to be someone who their book needs a little love. One of the things I do like to do, sort of a niche, I like to get books that have been out for like 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. They're still relevant, they're still readable, but the publicity train has left the station and they've been left behind. You can really see it with sales. Everybody sales are great at first, and then it's like they drop off a cliff. After about 2 years, like nobody's buying that book anymore because basically anyone who wanted to read it has already read it. But a lot of people never knew it existed, so that's reminding them again. And people appreciate that, they like that idea. And again, writers from other countries, as long as it's obviously in English. My only requirements are I want it to have been published. Not that I'm being a snob or anything, but that means at least somebody has edited. And it also means if it's on Amazon, that people have a way of getting it. Otherwise, you're saying it's a great book, but there's no way you can read it. That's sort of a waste of time.
Advice would you give to writers who are feeling invisible or that their work just isn't getting the traction that it should?
Well, I think one thing when it comes to selling, to actually marketing, I think it's a mistake to try to sell your book to everybody because no one has ever written a book that everybody liked or was interested in. I always say that my wife will love a book that I would never pick up, and I might love a book that she would never pick up, and then there are other books that we both like. So it's very subjective. So you need to look at your book very realistically. Like there's a question on the forum, on the Snowflakes forum, it says, why would someone want to read this? And that's a question you have to ask. You might be wasting your time trying to attract readers that are not going to be attracted by what you have. So, but with the internet, though, you can be a lot more specific. Also, I've actually sold more books at book signings than I ever did, at Amazon through Amazon, whatever. So wherever you are, whenever there's anything where people are gathering, get over there and get your book out there. Yeah, I mean, it could be you know, a Christmas party. It could be a farmer's something or other, whatever. Every time you get a chance, if you might only sell a couple of books, but once again, it gets the word out there, and they'll bring that book home, and people say, what is this? And you need to keep track of it too. Publishers can forget about you if you're not careful. They have a lot of books that they're dealing with. That doesn't mean you have to be annoying about it or bug them, but you're just nice. How's it going with the book? Anything I need to do, any suggestions, that kind of thing. Because otherwise, you they might worry more about the people who are contacting them all the time and forget about you. Your book is like your child. You have to love your book, and you want it to be validated. And obviously, work your if you're on Facebook. I mean, I have 5,000 Facebook friends, of whom I probably know 100. I don't know who any of these people are or how they became my friends, but a good way of getting the word out. And another thing to remember too, I think, don't wait until you get your book published to get the word out about it. You can start way in advance. So your book doesn't have to be lost. I mean, you can, but you need to do it though. It's not going to happen by itself. You can't just put up your Amazon page and then say, well, I can't wait till people see my page. Because if they never heard of you, why would they?
Well, you've given us a lot of very helpful advice, and the poems that you've read have been wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for watching Poetic Lines, where writers make the language sing. If you enjoyed this episode, come back next month for another in-depth conversation about the power and delight of language and how poetry can enhance people's lives. Have an idea about a possible topic or guest? Send me a message through my website, poeticlines.net. Thanks for watching Poetic Lines, where writers make the language sing. If you enjoyed this episode, come back next month for another in-depth conversation about the power and delight of language and how poetry can enhance people's lives. Have an idea about a possible topic or guest? Send me a message through my website, poeticlines.net.